Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rice University, welcome to Scientia, and welcome to our featured annual colloquium of the year, the Bachner Lecture. I'm Jim Pomerantz, Professor of Psychology and Director of Scientia, which is Rice University's Institute for the History of Science and Culture. The Bachner Lecture is the premier colloquium of the academic year for Scientia, and so the members and the fellows of Scientia and I like very much to welcome you for joining us. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm pleased to say we have a speaker this evening. Some of you know her personally. Others of you know her by reputation or perhaps have seen her on television. And Irene Pepperberg, who is a loyal following both inside academia and outside. And it will be my pleasure to introduce her in just a moment. But first, let me note that the Bachner Lecture celebrates the career of the distinguished mathematician and historian of science, Solomon Bachner, who was a professor of mathematics at Rice University from 1968 until 1982, upon his death. Before that, he spent 35 years on the faculty of Princeton University as a professor of mathematics. He was a member of the National Academy of Sciences and a major intellectual force on this campus, where his public lectures, in particular his lecture assessing Einstein's contribution on the anniversary, the 100th birthday anniversary of Einstein, were intellectual occasions of great note. This ultimately led to the foundation of our organization, Scientia, which serves as a focal point at Rice for people who are interested in the history of science. Scientia oversees the DeLange conferences, which take place on this campus every few years, and I'd like to note that we have a DeLange conference coming up in March of 2007 on the topic of the history of libraries. So, excuse me, the future of libraries and their history. So, please stay tuned for further announcements on that. The Bachner Lecture Series that we're celebrating tonight was inaugurated in 1983 with a lecture by I. Bernard Cohen. For those of you who are doing the math, and this would make tonight the 23rd annual lecture in this series. We've more than reached the age of maturity. Let's take a moment to thank Dr. Bachner for getting us started, and at the same time thank the Rice faithful who helped found this organization, Scientia. That would include Al Van Helden and Ronnie Wells and others like Dick Grandy and Franz Bratson, Susan McIntosh, and others who have made Scientia into the prize that it is today. Bachner Lectures are nothing if not remarkable. In recent years, we've heard from such speakers as C. Everett Koop, the former Surgeon General of the United States, Henry Rosofsky from Harvard, Danny Kahneman from Princeton University, who the next year won the Nobel Prize, and last year, our former Rice University president and then Columbia University president, George Rupp. This year, our Bachner Lecture fits well into that tradition because we get to hear from a speaker who has broad appeal across the range of disciplines. And in Dr. Pepperberg's case, that includes the study of animals, the relationship between animals and humans, the nature of intelligent and cognitive systems, our capacity for language, the biological basis for language and thought, and even epistemology. Tonight's lecture is not only the Bachner Lecture, it's also the concluding lecture of the academic year, so we will be wishing you all a great summer and ask that you check our website in the coming months to get a preview of what our program for next fall will be covering. That topic is still under wraps at this point, but I'd like to thank all of our speakers who have participated in the colloquium series this year. Some of them are in the audience with us right now. We've had a series of excellent talks, and for those of you who may have missed some of those talks, they are, with the exception of the last one by Tony Wright, all up on the Scientia website or accessible through that website. Dr. Wright's and Dr. Pepperberg's will be up as soon as the videos can be completed. I'd also like to take this occasion to thank our program coordinator, Ellen Butler, who's the one who makes this series operate. Many of you in the room know Ellen. She's always the first one to arrive. She's the one who gets our speakers prepared. She's the one who helps speakers coming in from out of town, like Dr. Pepperberg, make their travel arrangements. She's endlessly cheerful, works with the IT staff, including Tom Lytle and Doug Kilgore, who make the videos. She also deals with the Rice faculty in the most gracious and understanding way. Some of you may know that faculty can be cantankerous and forgetful, incomprehensible, and high maintenance sometimes simultaneously. but Ellen deals with it all, and Grace points us in the right direction, brings out the best of us even when we're not at our best. So we thank her for another great year. As you may know, Scientia picks a different theme every year, and this year our theme is simply animals and humans. That theme is selected by a group of Rice faculty members. It was led again this year by Professor David Queller of the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. We're always looking for suggestions of themes for future years, so if you have those, please send them his way or my way. If you're not familiar with the drill at Scientia Lectures, we'll be following the customary drill. Dr. Pepperberg will speak for the conventional 50 minutes or so, followed by a period of question and answers. We will have roaming microphones, and we ask that you ask your question loudly enough that Dr. Pepperberg does not have to repeat the question, or should I say parrot the question. And also, I'm just winging it. And okay. And we also ask that you ask your questions in what we have lovingly come to call question format, and leave the lecturing to Dr. Pepperberg. So now for the reason why we're here tonight, to listen to Dr. Irene Pepperberg, who's had a remarkable, truly astonishing career trajectory, one that I doubt she could have ever predicted when she began her schooling. She took her bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science from MIT in chemistry, and then went on for both a master's and a PhD in chemical physics at Harvard University. You might wonder why it is that someone working in the field of chemical physics would end up studying animal behavior, but that will be part of the story that I suspect we'll be hearing tonight. But it was toward the latter end of those years that Dr. Pepperberg, who grew up in a house full of budgies and spent much of her childhood talking with them, realized the enormous potential for studying the behavior of language in parrots. So she took off to a pet store, and the rest, as they say, is history. I think many of you know a little bit about her parrot named Alex, but he will become a close friend of yours, I think, by the time the evening is over. Alex now has a faculty appointment at a prestigious Eastern University, drives a nice car, has groupies, and sends word through his agent that he was unable to attend tonight's lecture, but believes that his friend and colleague, Dr. Pepperberg, would be an acceptable substitute. So, of course, I'm kidding. Alex is right now, as we speak, at Brandeis on the job, has an excellent work ethic, except for occasional slips that we also may hear about a little bit tonight. But meanwhile, Dr. Pepperberg has pursued a fascinating career, beginning with a faculty appointment at Purdue University, and then moving on to Northwestern, and then to University of Arizona, where she was an associate professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She's worked at the Media Lab at MIT and at a dizzying array of other institutions. She now spends her time in part based at Brandeis University, which is where her lab, or Alex's lab is located, and also spends a bit of time as a research associate at Harvard University, where she also teaches classes. But also she has a third hat, which is being president of the Alex Foundation, and we'll hear more about that soon. The Alex Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3 foundation that supports the research you'll be hearing about tonight. This is income tax week, so for those of you who are looking for a last-minute deduction, I'm sure that Dr. Pepperberg would like to speak with you. She's extremely well published as a book from Harvard University Press called The Alex Studies, Cognitive and Communicative Abilities of Gray Parrots, and another edited volume. She's published in a large number of refereed journals, including the Journal of Comparative Psychology, Behavioral Processes, the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America, and others. She also reviews for what she says is far too many journals than she ought to. Her research has been supported almost continuously over the years by the National Science Foundation, the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, the Whitehall Foundation, Kenneth Scott Charitable Trust, and Pet Care Trust. Among her many honors and recognitions have been teaching awards both at Harvard University and the University of Arizona, a Professor of the Month Award from the National Women's History Month. She's a fellow of the American Behavioral Society, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychological Society, and the American Ornithologists Union. She won a Guggenheim Fellowship that supported her in 1997, and 3 years later a Selby Fellowship from the Australian Academy of Sciences. When she's not busy with Alex in the lab, she's off on the road speaking at universities and speaking to other groups, including bird clubs, people who find Alex just as fascinating as those of us who work in universities or medical centers do. So, in fact, I think you have a major event coming up in New York City just 10 days from now, and if any of you are interested in attending that event, I won't scare you off with the price tag, but I'll say that, again, encourage you to talk to Dr. Pepperberg. So without further ado, let me ask you to turn off your cell phones, pages, or anything else that beeps, and tune into Dr. Irene Pepperberg, whose title is In Search of King Solomon's Ring, Studies on the Cognitive and Communicative Abilities of Gray Parrots. Dr. Pepperberg.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor, and I do have to say Alex does have his groupies. Those of you who have followed the work, really, really does. Okay, a little bit of background. I started this work in the 1970s, and at the time, most people who were studying the cognitive and communicative abilities of animals either used creatures such as the great apes with a close phylogenetic relationship to humans, or animals with large brains such as the dolphins. So when I put in my first grant proposal, proposing to do this kind of work with a parrot, the pink sheets came back essentially asking me what I was smoking. I mean, I kid you not, it was quite a downer. But I had perseverance, and we got Alex and had him do a couple of things, and we resubmitted the grant. And this time I was very fortunate. I had somebody on the panel who was studying bird song and knew the striking parallels between the ontogeny of vocal communication in birds and humans, and decided that maybe this lady wasn't quite as crazy as previously thought. And for those of you who don't know the birdsong story, it's really fascinating. In both birds and humans, there's a sensitive phase. We no longer call it a critical period, but there is a sensitive phase where exposure to the adult system allows development to proceed most readily. In both birds and humans, there's a practice or a babbling period in which they experiment with the sounds that will ultimately become part of the repertoire. In both birds and humans, there's a need to learn not just what to say, but the appropriate context in which to say it. So just like little kids will go around, they'll go, what's that? And you go, that's a chair. And they go, what's that? And you go, table. And then they go, what's that? And you go, no, it's who's that? That's Uncle Joe. Birds learn certain songs to sing in territorial defense versus mate attraction. And in both birds and humans, there are particular chunks of the brain that are most closely associated with the memory, the storage, the production, whatever, of these vocalizations. So given all that, the next question was, well, if there are all these parallels, why isn't anybody else looking at these birds as good subjects? Well, there were, okay? And the interesting thing was, going back and doing the literature searches and finding all this stuff, one of the first people to study cognitive and communicative abilities of birds was O.H. Maurer, very distinguished scientist in the 40s and 50s, using the standard operant conditioning type techniques of the day. For those of you who haven't taken Psych 101, basically you treat the animal's head as a black box. You do not worry about what goes in there. You give the animal a stimulus. You get some kind of response. If it's the correct response, you give them what we call a non-referential food reward, meaning it doesn't refer to the task itself, but it's just a food reward. And you hope that the animal says, oh, I got rewarded for doing this. I will do this many more times. Well, interesting enough, parrots failed to learn under these conditions, at least failed to learn referential, meaningful communication. So about 10 years later, Grosslight and Zahner said, well, gee, maybe Maurer wasn't really rigorous enough in what he was doing, so they locked a bunch of mynah birds into sound isolation boxes. They paid them tapes of human speech. The birds learned to reproduce the sounds of the experimenters coming in and out of the room, turning the tape recorders on and off, but nothing on the tape recorders. Okay. About this time, the neurobiologists got in the act and said, hey, birds have no cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex being the so-called mammalian organ of intelligence. So of course these birds are incapable of any kind of complex cognitive processing. And that's where things sat for a while. Well, when anybody says something's impossible or can't happen or whatever, there's always the person who comes along and says, aha. And the first aha actually came from the neuro people. Because in the late 70s, around the time I was beginning to start looking at this work, they started looking at the bird brain a little more carefully. And at that time, they found areas, the striatal areas of these birds, that seems to perform cortically. And it turns out that there was size differences in this area in different birds, and they were almost non-existent in the domesticated chicken. They were significantly larger in the pigeon, and they were relatively humongous in the parrots, the crows, the jays, and the mynas. And when they gave these birds tests of the so-called intelligent behavior type tests, they found that the birds with these incredibly large striatal areas performed about as well as the primates. If we sort of jump ahead a little bit to about a year ago, papers came out, Jarvis and crew, Reiner, people like that, studying bird brains are now arguing that the bird brain is developed from the same pallial matter that our brain is, and these are much more, even more cortical-like. And they don't even call it striatal areas anymore. They have a whole bunch of new terms, and they've reorganized what they consider the bird brain. But the bottom line is that these people started saying, aha, there is a piece of the brain that might possibly do this. So this is about the time that I came into the study. And I also, by doing a literature search, found this lovely paper by a German colleague, Dietmar Todt, who was studying social learning in gray parrots. And he was an ethologist, okay, not a standard psychologist, an ethologist, and decided, look, in the wild, these birds have to learn from one another. They've got to learn the situation. How do they learn? They learn by listening to one another. So he developed something called the model rival, or the MR technique, in which humans demonstrate the behavior to be acquired, and it's not a black box anymore. It's a social information processor in there. And we've adapted the technique from Dietmar somewhat, but the basics are the same. Essentially, you have two people. You have the parrot sitting on a perch. You have a referential reward. This is real important. An object that refers to the label will refer to this object that we're trying to teach the bird. Referential awards are very important. It turns out in studies with children, okay, to get them to learn, okay, when they don't normally learn. Children have developmental disabilities and things like that. There's often use of those non-referential awards we were talking about before that neither relate to the task being targeted nor the skill being taught. And the children have a lot of trouble because there's a confound. If I waved this in front of you and said gliptich, and you looked at me and said gliptich, and I popped an M&M in your mouth, you'd think, oh, I say this weird sound, I get an M&M. So I'm going to keep saying the weird sound and get the M&M. But you won't get the M&M unless this is in front of your face. And after a while, you kind of say, oh, well, I guess this has to be in front of my face before I say gliptich, and then I get the M&M. But you're not going to learn that this is a gliptich. Whereas if you said gliptich and I threw it at you and you caught it, you'd say, oh, one-to-one correlation. So we use objects, and we use labels that relate to these objects. And this is an important aspect that we go into. Okay. So we have our referential reward, generally not a laser pointer, but something like, a key that the bird can use to scratch underneath his chin, or something that's interesting to the bird. I show it to my student, who is the model for the bird's behavior and the rival for the bird's attention. Anyway, so I give it to my, and I'm the trainer, and I show it to my student. I say, what's this? And she says, key. And I give it to her, and it's key, and she's playing with it and talking about the key. And the bird sees that this weird sound has mediated transfer of the object, and it's like falling off the perch, trying to get it. So then we exchange roles of model, rival, and trainer. So the bird sees that one person is not always the questioner and the other the respondent, but it's an interactive process. So now she shows it to me, and she says, what's this? And I go, Rah! And she goes, no, wrong. And she turns her back to me and hides the object. And the bird sees that not any weird noise mediates transfer of the object, but only a particular noise. And I get another chance, and I get it right. And this turns out to be an extremely powerful training technique. These are the kinds of things that we use for the bird. This, plant stakes that he can chew apart, keys that he can tickle himself with. We use rows instead of red because he learns the vowels first, and we were training pegwood at the time for a clothespin. So we wanted a separate before red and peg, and so we used rows instead of red. And this is also a four-corner key, so it has both shape, and that's also going to be important later on. And over the course of the experiments, Alex has learned to identify about 50 different objects, 7 colors, 5 shapes. He knows quantities up to and included 6, and we've just got 7 and 8. We'll hear a little bit about that at the end of the talk. He can identify bigger and smaller, same and different. He has concept of category. He has things like I want X and want to go Y, where X and Y are appropriate object or locations. There's a certain amount of displacement in that he can ask for something that's not physically present. And these are intentional requests because he asks for a banana and you give him a grape, you're going to be wearing that grape. There is a certain amount of understanding, so you can look at a little toy and you can ask him what color, what shape, what matter, what object. So these are, he has to listen to my questions in order to know what to respond to. Basically, we can ask him certain things about objects that are not present. So you can ask him things like the color of corn. If it's not present, he can tell you it's yellow. He combines these labels to identify, request, confuse, and categorize more than 100 different things in the laboratory. And I'm probably missing some of the other clever things he does, but we'll get to them as I go through the talk. Now, I don't want you just to believe that he does all this stuff. We do some very rigorous testing. I'm not going to go into the testing details because then I couldn't have time to give you the data. But these are the types of results, and I'm going to run through this slide and give you all the background so you can follow the rest of the slides, which will look like this. This is basically a confusion matrix. It presents not just the correct responses, which are on the diagonal, but errors, which are on the off-diagonal element. So the way you read it, it's the object presented to the parrot. So it's paper, key, wood, hide, pegwood, green versions of the thing, rose versions, Q for cork, 3-corner, 4-corner. This is the label presented by the parrot. This is an old data slide. Even on this beautiful projection screen, if I had a 100 by 100 matrix, you would be using your binoculars to kind of read it. So I present the old data slide. So as you can see, he's right most of the time. He's right about 75, 80% of the time, which is not bad. But people say, well, wait a minute, that's a 20, 25% error rate. That's still a pretty high error rate. Well, it is unless you look at the errors, and that's why we present the errors, because they're really interesting. Okay, they are really, really interesting because if you look here and you see green key, 13 times I've asked him to identify green key, and he's called it a key. So to paraphrase Gertrude Stein, a key is a key is a key. Why am I counting this as an error? Because the deal was if the thing had color, you had to tell me the color. Okay, if it had shape, you had to tell me the shape. That was a training procedure. Okay, so if he just calls it a key, that's wrong. It's not giving me all the information that I need. So, but these generic errors, they're really fascinating because it also suggests that he has some concept of category. Now, you may sit there and go, so of course parrots have categories. They know food and not food and predator versus, not predator and mate, possible versus not mate. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is using the vocalizations, okay, to do this. Remember, I started off presenting a grant proposal saying that a parrot could learn to label all these things and people think I'm, smoking something. And here I have what seems to be the beginning of category formation. So we started by giving him, to test it out, we started by giving him objects that he couldn't label, but whose colors and shapes he could know. So colored and shaped things like, buttons or dog biscuits or something, and he could tell us, what color or what shape. But this didn't really tell us that he had a concept of category, okay? He could know that, green was, and 3-corner were remarkable attributes of the object, but could he understand that there was a hierarchical system here? That you could we train him to learn the label color and understand that under this label color was a whole set of things, red, blue, green, orange, purple, whatever. And under another label shape, there was a whole bunch of other stuff, 3, 4, 5, 6 corner. And under matter, there was wood, paper, things like that. Could he label this hierarchical concept of color? So what we started doing was training him on objects that had both color and shape, a small subset of things with color and shape, and asking him either the color or the shape, and then insisting that he label it, such as green wood. Now this may seem really simple, unless you're a parrot. Okay, think about this. So this is a parrot. So he's sitting on a perch, and the first thing I do is I wave this silly thing in front of his face. So he has to attend to what it is I'm waving in front of his face. Then he has to listen to my question. Is she targeting color? Is she targeting shape? Then if he says, oh, it's color, okay, so which of these 7 colors are the appropriate answer? And then he has to encode that vocally. Say green, all right? And he has to be able to look at the same object and on Monday tell me its color and on, Friday tell me its shape. Okay, he has to be able to, transfer and based on what he hears. So again, we train him on a small subset of items and we test him on the things in the lab at the time. So it's, blue 3-corner, and these was key, wood, and rawhide. And this was just the color queries, and you can see he's right most of the time. He's making some generic errors. If he says blue corner wood, that's an error. I'm just asking about color. I don't want to hear the word corner, okay? U is something unintelligible, so if he says something like green wood, I can't tell if it's green or 3. That's an error if we can't understand it. That's out. We get very similar labels, data for the shape. So again, he's right most of the time, occasionally giving us color, but not very often. Okay, he's doing this really quite well. Again, you're at about 75, 80% here. We then gave him novel color combinations. So at this time, he had seen a lot of little 2-cornered objects, little football-shaped things, and a lot of blue wood, but never blue 2-cornered wood. And made a mistake first time, generic error, calling it wood, so I had to ask it to him twice. That's why the 2 is there. GY is gray. At this point, he's learned gray. For a gray parrot, everything is from silvery gray to almost black, basically, because that's their coloration. So we just didn't want to go shades of. It was just, there. So it's, and 5-cornered objects and things like this. So these are first trial responses. So we got something unintelligible, so it was an error. So again, I had to ask him twice. But you can see, again, these are first trial errors, and he's right most of the time. So I was pretty excited by this, and I presented at a conference, and people going like, yeah, that's really fascinating. But, he's not doing the kind of abstract concepts that Premack is talking about that his chimps can do. So what do people mean by abstract versus concrete concepts? Okay, concrete concept is he looks at the thing, and he understands that it's, green wood or something like that. But could he take a look at 2 objects, say B1, B2, both blue, and understand that there's a certain sameness about those 2 objects with respect to color that can be transferred to any other 2 objects, G1 and G2, that are both green. They have nothing in relationship to the original blue objects except a sameness with respect to color. Could he understand that abstract concept of sameness and likewise difference? Now, what we did with Alex was a little bit fancier. Premack had these, it was a beautiful study, but essentially his animal just looked at 2 objects and said whether they were same or not same, okay, using a little plastic chip to say it. We made Alex do the task, those of you my age, backwards and in heels. So what we did was we gave him 2 objects, and we asked him to tell us what about them was same, okay? Same matter in this question, if you're wondering. And again, we train him on a small subset of items, and then we test him on everything in the laboratory. And again, it's, you think this is a really easy test. But again, put yourself in the mind frame of a parrot. So now, I'm standing in front of him waving 2 stupid things in front of his face that he has to attend to. And I'm asking him, what's same or what's different. He has to process same or different. And then he has to determine which of, color, shape, or material is same or different and encode that vocally. So these are the data on all the familiar objects. The first transfer test is all the familiar objects in the lab, and he's pretty good about that. So then we go to a Toys R Us to get all things that are completely unfamiliar. Little pink plastic flamingos and gray plastic elephants, you hold them up, what's same, does it matter, what's different color, things like that, okay? And what was interesting is he was slightly more accurate. Now this began to scare us as the data came in because it's like you're not, it's a harder test. Why are you more accurate? Well, remember, we give him referential rewards, okay? Any click in here about why he was a little bit more accurate? Now, giving this bird Christmas in July, all these new toys, okay? New things that he could chew up and play with. And those of you who have parrots, if there's anybody in the audience with parrots, there's that eye flash when they get kind of excited about something. And you could, woo, these are cool new things for me. So, and parrots, those of you who are wondering, parrots are slightly neophobic. So when we say novel, we actually kept them up on a shelf, okay, in the laboratory for about a week beforehand. So he could just sort of, we didn't refer to them, we didn't do anything, but they were just sort of sitting up there to avoid, any kind of neophobia that was possible. So we were pretty excited about this. I mean, this was kind of cool. But we were concerned about, at this point, was he paying attention to our questions? I mean, after all this training and the testing and stuff, he might have been responding just, okay, let's pick the odd attribute. So we replicated the study, but now occasionally would ask him what's same if there were two possible things that were same. So if he was listening to my question, he would tell us, one of those two things that were same. If he was just going for the odd attribute and ignoring me, he'd give us the one wrong response. But he was right, and this is I've just pulled out the data on this, and he was right on that. So that was pretty exciting. We then went on to, and this is, the little thing, basically we went on to concepts of absence. Now, yeah, this is a little joke. Of course, if you have a bird feeder, you kind of know there's an element of truth to this. But the point is, animals respond to absence. I mean, I think we're a little ahead of the song season, but in Boston now, just the beginning of, birds are coming up, establishing territories. Bird is in his territory, doesn't hear the other birds singing, responds to that absence of song by invading that territory. Okay, but absence is a tough thing to show in the laboratory because it's based on the expectation of presence. What do I mean by that? Okay, imagine it's 9 o'clock at night and you're kind of hungry and you go up to the fridge and you open the door and you're looking for something, to graze on, and you don't really care and it's fine, You respond differently than if you had a representation of a piece of chocolate cake that was left over from dinner and you open the fridge and that cake is missing. You respond to that absence, okay? So how do we get this? I mean, if you read the literature, you find that testing absence is really a difficult thing. So how are we going to do this with a parrot? Well, we did an end run. We said, okay, let's do the same different task, but now train him to say none if nothing were same or different. Okay, so we got absence of an attribute. And so again, we train him on a small subset of items, test him on everything familiar in the laboratory, and again, you get pretty good data. And another trip to Toys R Us, and again, you get some pretty interesting data on that. We were also very interested in numerical concepts. Why? Because in 1967, Lenenberg wrote an article stating that animals cannot do anything language-like or, arithmetic-like or mathematical-like because they lack, they lack this kind of concepts of abstraction and relational concepts. Well, no offense to Lenenberg, who was a very, very brilliant scientist, but he hadn't been reading the literature on number representation in animals, particularly that coming out of Germany. In the 40s and 50s, Otto Köhler had done some interesting work. And by the way, I'm never going to claim that Alex has language. He's never going to come up here and give the talk while I sit on the side, drinking a margarita. And I'm not going to come up and claim that he is, doing calculus and things like that. But I am going to claim, some sort of arithmetic and mathematical and number concepts. And it's based on the work of Otto Köhler, who in the 40s and 50s had been looking at number concepts in birds, and he had this beautiful study, okay? He set up a table, and on that table were boxes, 8 boxes. Each box had a different paint splat on it, okay? And so the paint splats were different sizes, and he would alter these paint splats each trial. And he would then put the bird on the table and break off certain blobs of clay, and the bird would look at the number of blobs of clay and go over to the box with the same number of dots on it, okay? So Köhler claimed these birds were thinking in unnamed numbers and non-numerical counting, because they probably weren't going, 1, 2, 3, 4, looking for the, but they were doing some kind of match to sample with respect to numbers. What was fascinating is that he did this with a lot of different birds, and he found that the poor domesticated chicken bottomed out at about 2 or 3, pigeons came in at 4 to 5, and gray parrots and jackdaws came in at 7 to 8. And his colleagues transferred this to notes on a flute or flashes of light, so we went from simultaneous visual to sequential visual to sequential auditory, and the birds were still quite good at this type of thing. What was also fascinating is that researchers in the US at that time were looking at something called subitizing, a quick perceptual recognition of number. So if I do this to you, okay, and ask you how many, except for the odd biologist here who's used to counting the geese as they fly across and stuff, you're basically going to fall apart at about 4, just like the pigeons, okay? And so a lot of the studies ended up showing that there were 2 types of number concepts, and I'm trying to summarize an incredibly complex field for you. But essentially, for humans, there's a subitizing a pattern recognition, think dice or dominoes, okay? They go up to about 4. After which time there's some kind of estimation, approximation that goes on. There's also other interpretations of what's going on for the small numbers that people talk about something called object files and accumulators and things like that. It's a very sort of complex thing, but the basic idea is small children, animals, whatever, humans who are not given enough time to count can do a pattern recognition type of thing up to about 4, and they get it pretty much correct. And over 4, okay, they start to fall apart. So what about a parrot? Okay, I had a bird at this time that was doing, 3 and 4 cornered wood. Okay, was he doing it as a gestalt, triangle, okay, is triangle, but square? Was it just some kind of label for this pattern? Or was there something more involved? Or could there be something more involved? Premack found it was much harder for his chimpanzees to label quantity than to do match to sample with quantity. Geschwin showed that in the human brain, different parts of the brain were working for match to sample versus labeling of things. So, I had this labeling parrot. What could he do? So we trained him on a small subset of things in the laboratory, training him to identify 1 through 6 items. Now, interestingly, we started with 3 and 4 because he had 3 corner and 4 corner. We then went to 2 and 5, then to 6, and to 1 at the end, which is the exact opposite of what you do with children. And this turns out to be important because people look at how the children progress on a linear basis, forming a number line, but we didn't make that possible for Alex. And people say, why did you do that? And I said, well, I didn't want to cue him in any way. I wanted it to just be perceptual recognition of the number and see how far we could go. So we tested him on this. And again, a lot of these generic errors, so you show him the tray and you say how many, and he says key, and I go, that's fine, thank you very much, but how many key? So we get a lot of these generic errors, but most of the time he's right. And he makes a couple of errors, being off by 1 or 2, but he's not making a ton of these errors. Sometimes he's saying, pegwood or something like that. So again, it suggested to us that he could label these things. And of course, we didn't give him any time delay, okay? Unlike the people who were subitizing who had it flash in front of them and taken away. It's however you want it takes you to look at this thing, just give us a label. And we used objects that at the time he couldn't label in as random arrays as we can. We still got the same, 75, 80%. We gave him trays like this. How many key, how many cork, how many toys? And he was still correct. So he's obviously able to do some kind of separation. Now, this still isn't rocket science. I mean, you could see where he could still be doing some kind of perceptual type thing on this. So I was at a Psychonomic Society meeting, and I think it was 87. And I heard Trick and Peletian give a talk. And essentially, they were looking with humans. And it's not this particular test. This is our interpretation for Alex. But the basic idea was if you give humans a tray like this with red and blue wools and woods, and you ask them to tell you how many blue wood, by the time they process blue, not red, and wool versus wool and things like that, wood versus wool, they actually have to count. They can't do it by a perceptual mechanism. So we thought, woo, we can give this to Alex. No training involved. Let's just put the trays together and give it to him and see what happens. Well, what happened was really fascinating because he was right most of the time. Okay, and this is, you saw that tray. This is not the easiest thing. It wasn't perceptual things. If he was using a perceptual thing, we would have gotten some kind of Weber's law down here. He would have made more mistakes like you probably did as the numbers got higher, and the mistakes would have been more serious. He made some mistakes, but they weren't more serious. They were just sort of, randomly around here. So this was suggesting to us that he had some number concepts. We still couldn't argue that it was counting because we didn't know the process. And conceivably, parrots might have a better perceptual mechanism than you and I do. I mean, let's face it. When I give this talk, and there is that biologist in there who is watching geese flying overhead, they get that one of those labels was 8 things. Because they're used to seeing something fast and having to count it, okay? And having to get some really honed-in perceptual ability. But the average person can't. What about these birds? So, whenever everybody said he could count, I said, well, no, he can recognize number. We also had to do, and it was a 10-year gap in here because there were a lot of other things I was interested in. But people had always been ragging me on that study and saying, well, you've got, perception, production of numbers. But does he have comprehension of numbers? And initially you go, well, if he can produce them, can he comprehend them? But if you look at the child literature, in the interim between these two experiments, a lot of work had been done with children. And it turns out that you can take a child of about 3 years old, maybe a little bit older, but in that age range, and you show them some stuff and you say, how many? And they say 4. And it's really clear they know 4. Then you give them a big bowl of marbles and you say, give me 4. And they grab a big handful and they say, here. Okay, so they're able to, produce because they have a perception of what 4-ness looks like, but they can't count out 4 marbles. So could Alex do comprehension? So we gave him trays like this. And for those of you who I was talking to, and I said there are times when he is non-compliant and he gives us the look, which is this somewhat, if you, the eyes are like, I don't want to look at this tray. Both, the other eye on the other side, it's like, I just don't want to be here, forget it. I want to go back, right. And, sometimes he'll take his beak and just knock everything off the tray. But we give him a tray like this, and we ask him, okay, what color 6? So he has to go find the 6 things on the tray and then tell us its color. So he has to comprehend the label 6. And the data, when he was being compliant and not throwing things off the tray, were really quite good. And people say, well, why is it so much better than the production? 10 years of, stuff involving numbers. I mean, he'd been working with numbers and reviewing numbers for 10 years in the interim. So it wasn't such a thing. But what's this thing here done? Okay, you might wonder. Well, one of the things he did when we were going through a non-compliant stage was I showed him one of those trays, and there were, 3, 4, and 6 things on the tray. And I say, Alex, what color 3? And he looks at me and he goes, 5. And I go, no, Alex, what color 3? And he goes, 5. And I go, no, 3. And he goes, 5. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm fighting with a parrot, I mean, what is this going on here? So I'm really tired. I probably had just flown back from someplace or other. And I said, okay, Smarty, what color 5? Thinking, all right. And he looks at me, he goes, none. And when I sort of picked myself and the tray off the floor, I'm thinking there were no 5 things on that tray. And I'm getting that look, and it's like, So what I'm still sitting there going, because years ago Dan Dennett had said, how would he respond if there was nothing? And I said, I don't know, We tried it once. I mean, we'll get to that experiment in a bit. And there were a bunch of things on the tray. I asked him what's purple. There was nothing purple. He said he wanted a grape. And I went, oh, what do I do with this? Shove it under the table and not worried about it right now. So the exciting thing about this was not just that we replicated the trials and he was right 5 out of 6 times. This time was he told us a label of a color that wasn't on the tray. But, that he had instituted this experiment. I mean, I would never have given him anything this complicated. And it was basically, we're going to do this. So he is getting into the stage of running the laboratory. We were training Griffin, another parrot in the lab, on sequential sounds. So we use a computer, okay, to produce the tone so we can play with the intertone intervals and the length of the tones and a whole bit. But this was one afternoon. I had come into the lab, and I was just sort of playing around with the birds. And I went, Griffin, listen. And I snapped my hands, and Griffin's little beak was up in the air at that point, and he didn't want to answer. And then so I repeated the try. I said, Griffin, listen. How many? So Alex sits there on the edge of the cage and goes, 4. And I said, be quiet. I clicked only twice. And then I go, Griffin, listen. How many? And then Alex says, 6. And I go, okay. We have another set of experiments here. So those of you who know the work of Sally Boyson, she would have her chimps actually walk around the room looking at opening up boxes and looking at how many oranges or apples in a box, and then go over and point to the Arabic number that was the correct response. And if we are lucky, this is what we did with Alex. We had...
Begin. How many nuts total? 3. That's right.
Okay. So what we basically had, we put things under a tray. There was, 1 nut under this tray, 2 nuts under this tray. We picked them up and shut them down so he can't see the number at the same time. And then we ask him to add. And he was basically right, again, most of the time. 1, of course, was obviously easy. this was really interesting, okay? What's going on here? This is where we've got only 50%. You know, that's quite a bit lower than we normally have with him. Well, remember, you saw that. I'm giving him 2 seconds, roughly, to look under the thing. And all these errors, essentially, if you look at all these errors, that was for 5 and 0, okay? And he was saying 6. What we were asking him for was 6. So if I showed him 5 things on the tray, and I gave him 5 things under one cup, no things under another cup, these are just first trial responses. He actually gets 4 trials to do something, 3 or 4 trials to do something. So so if I went like this and like this, he would say 6. And I was getting really upset. I'm thinking, you know 5. You've known 5 for like, over 10 years. What's the deal here? Why can't you do 5? And, and then I wake up one morning, 3 o'clock in the morning with my standard anxiety attacks, and I'm going, wait a minute. I'm giving him 2 seconds. What if he's subitizing 1 through 4, and he needs to count 5? Could I count 5 things in 2 seconds? No. So we went back into the lab, and the second half of the experiments, we now gave him 10 seconds for everything. So we lift up the cup, wait a chunk of time, and then cover it. Lift up the cup, wait a second time, cover it. And now he's 100% right on 5.0. So this was our first evidence for some kind of counting-like behavior. And I still say counting-like because you still worry about it. Now, we went back to the none business. And now we put nothing under the cups. And we wanted to see if he would say none. Well, 3 times he said 1, which suggested that he knew it was down low there. 5 times he wouldn't answer us at all. It was like, he would just look at us like, huh? And he just wouldn't answer. So we started realizing that his zero-like concept wasn't the same as ours. He was responding none to the absence of an attribute, an absence, for example, of 5-ness on the tray. So it's still a very sophisticated type of behavior. I mean, it's still absence. It's not quite as zero, not the same zero as we have. And now the important thing is to see how long it takes him to train. Will this go very quickly? That he can learn to, that no, absence of stuff, not just absence of the concept. So these are the kinds of things. We're now working on 7 and 8. He's just learned to say them. What we did very quickly, because it's a long study, we have trained him to identify blobs of stuff with, labels, vocal labels. We then trained him to identify Arabic numbers with these same labels. We never put the Arabic numbers and the blobs of stuff together. So the only thing that these had in common was that vocal label. Think of a triangle with there. And then we gave him the Arabic numbers on a tray, and we'd show him like a 5 and a 6. And we'd say what color number bigger or what color number smaller, because he had learned bigger and smaller, and he was able to do that. Okay, so he was had that some kind of representation of what those Arabic numbers meant based on the vocal label. And then we've trained him with the vocal label 7 and 8. Trained him on a sort of a number line by training him that 6 is less than 7 and things like that. And it looks like he understands that 7 blobs of something are 7. So we're doing a lot of work on this, but this is the next project. Okay, so this is always one of the criticisms of our work. And I think, I'm hoping that even by the time I get through this part of the talk, you're thinking that this really can't be. But we do have to test things like this. So we gave him trays like this. And I call this a recursive task. My linguist friends say, no, it's not, which is OK. But it's a complicated task anyway. So the point is, you give him this kind of tray, and you say, what object is green? Or what shape is blue? Or what, things like that. And so he has to really comprehend all of his objects and all of his labels and all that stuff. And I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly because we're running a little bit short on time here. And this is the interesting one that I stop at because he's still correct statistically significantly, but the kind of errors he's making here are fun. So close color compound, I showed him what color is the, something, and he says green, and I can't tell if it's green or gray error. But this is the fun one. Okay. So occasionally, I show him the tray, and I ask him, what's the color of the block? And he tells me the color of the rock, which is Play-Doh. And so I call up my, friends who are studying children, and I say, do you see anything like whatever? He said, oh yeah, this is real exciting. The ends of strings. Okay, what he's hearing is what color is the yak? Okay, that little sound kind of caught in the middle there, as far as he's concerned. It's not always. I mean, he's not always making these. Makes an occasion. He's just hearing what's the color of the yak? Rock, block, bach, which is the way he says box. Okay. And this was really fascinating that it was that kind of type of error. And again, it wasn't, he was still statistically significant, but, he was making a childlike error. We then upped the ante for him and gave him a conjunctive addition to this. So now he's looking at this tray and he has to say what object is green and three-corner. Okay, and tell us its material or the equivalent, mixing the other two kinds of attributes. Mix two attributes and tell me about the third. And here, again, any way you want to cut it, he's still right at a statistically significant value. So he really does understand what his labels represent. When I moved to Tucson in the early 90s, I was able to expand the project. And this was important not simply because we wanted to increase that N sample that everybody rags me about. Was Alex some kind of avian Einstein? I mean, but the other point is that getting him two new birds let me start looking at a question that had been really bugging me, that nobody had actually challenged me on, but that had been bugging me for a long time, which was why was that modeling technique so powerful? Why did it work so well? And why had everybody else failed to establish two-way communications with these birds without it? And I couldn't just play around with the training technique with Alex. Grays don't like change a whole lot. If I change the training technique, it's possible that he might have stopped learning, not because of the way I changed the technique, but just because I changed it, period. So what would happen if I got two new birds who had no preconceived notions of what was going on, and I gave them different training? I could do that with these birds. So there was Cairo and Alo. Cairo was 3.5 months when I got him. Alo was 7. We actually had to let them grow up a little bit more before they could talk to us. And we started looking at, okay, so what are the elements of input in that model technique? What are the critical ones? Well, I've told you a lot about reference. We don't have to go over that again. But there was contextual applicability or functionality. Why did the birds learn these stupid sounds? Well, initially to get the object. Later on, we taught the label want to separate tax versus mands, requests versus identifications. But initially, you'll learn the label to get the object. And there was a lot of social interaction. I mean, the bird saw the student and I interacting. We'd interact with the bird. The bird would have a chance to respond to this. We could shape his behavior so he could start saying things like A-er for paper. P, is, by the way, is very difficult if you don't have lips. They use esophageal speech to get that. So the point was, what if we started removing some of these elements of input? What would happen? So we gave the two young birds two labels in each of these contexts. Two labels in audio tape where they sat in a room listening to a tape of one of Alex's sessions. No reference, no functionality, no interaction. There was what we call the basic video, where they sat in the room looking at a videotape of one of Alex's sessions. So there was some reference, because we saw, we all talked about quarks and watched the quarks transfer and the stuff like that. Only partial functionality, because Alex, they were certainly in Alex's tape, but for these parrots sitting in the room, whatever they said was useless. Okay? And there was no interaction, because they were sitting alone in a room. And we contrasted that with two labels in the model rival technique that had everything. And Alo learned paper and cork from model rival, failed to learn wood, key, rock, and nail. Cairo, we used one label the same with the birds to see if there was any bird difference, and one label different to see if there was anything about the labels. So he learned paper and nail from model rival, did not learn the other labels from the other techniques. Well, this was kind of cool, but this was, stage one. There's a lot more to do. So we then did what we call the video reward system. What if, how important was the reward? Were they just saying the label and practicing it, not getting reward and extinguishing? Was interaction useless? Who knows? So we set up, and again, my age shows, we set up this old Groucho Marx type thing, say the magic word, and the object came down on a little pulley system. We tried all sorts of other things that they basically ended up scaring the birds. So this pulley system worked out okay. And we still call it partial functionality because there was a couple of second delay. And that could have been important. So we didn't want to, say it was full. We did video human. It turns out that if you read the child literature, you find out that if you plunk your kid in front of Sesame Street, the child does learn. There's no question. But the child learns an awful lot more if you sit and watch Sesame Street with your child. So you're paying attention. Look what's here. Look what Big Bird has. You are highlighting what is important. You are focusing attention. You're making sure the attention is where you want it to be. So what happened if a student sat in the room with the bird, watching the video, and said, look what Alex has. Okay, so video human. Solo is a misnomer. I couldn't get joint attention across the board here. Mike Tomasello and Dare Baldwin, people like that, have done a lot of work on the joint attention. What that means is, if you have a little child and you're trying to talk to it about things, and you sit on the floor with the child and you jointly attend to, say, the little red truck that you're playing with, and you say, it's a truck, it's a red truck, let's play with the truck, make the truck grow boom. You say all that stuff, jointly attending, the child abstracts the label truck and learns the label is a truck. If, however, the child is sitting on the floor playing with the truck and your back is to the child and you're mumbling about all the trucks and the red trucks and the whole bunch like that, lacking joint attention, the child has no reason to expect that all this noise has anything to do with what's going on. Just the frequency of hearing the word truck doesn't really do it, and they don't learn the label. So we replicated that. The student sat in the room with her back to the bird, talking about the object that was in front of the bird, and again, we had model rival. And Alo learned truck and wool from model rival, no nail, no chain, no bear, no key. Kaio learned wool, cork, and wood from model rival, no key, no block, no truck, no chain, no bear. So we're finding that there's a lot more stuff going on. We then got Griffin in the laboratory at 7.5 weeks. And this is just the thing that says, do not ever buy an unweaned baby bird because hand feeding them is the scariest thing you'll ever do in your life because you can aspirate them very easily. And again, we waited till he was a bit older, but we started doing some more work on this. One of the questions that came up was, okay, maybe we weren't, with that human trial, maybe we weren't giving them enough input, okay? So what if instead of just sitting there going, look what Alex has, we held up the thing and said, this is it. Look at the same thing, trying to show the correspondence between the object and what was on the video. So Griffin learned paper, nail, wood, wool, rock, and key from model rival. Failed to learn chain and bear, chalk and bear in those situations. We also started worrying about habituation. Now these videotapes were about 20, 30 minutes long. They weren't tape loops. I mean, they had a whole set, one of Alex's sessions on it. There was a lot of different things going on. But and we gave the birds 50 of these sessions. Now, normally, it takes them about 20, 25 sessions to start making some attempt at the label. And again, it might not be perfect in those early sessions. It might be 8 or something like that, or E for key, but they're starting it. 50 sessions with these videotapes. The bird isn't doing anything, and the students are saying, I am bored out of my gourd. I want double pay for sitting in on these video sessions. So we're thinking maybe the birds are habituating and just, blowing it off and not paying attention. So we did a whole nother set of experiments where we had live interactive video. So now there was 2 students working with Alex doing a session, 1 student filming at that session, another student with Griffin making sure he was paying attention to the video, and yet another student organizing this whole crazy, thing going on. And again, no learning from the video. And if we switched a label into model rival, he got it. 20, 25 sessions, but it was as though he hadn't had any training. I mean, it was as though the video was totally useless. We then said, well, what if we really replicate the Dare Baldwin study, Mike Tomasello study? So the students sat with Alex playing with a little ring. It's your ring, it's your shiny ring. Do you want to play with the ring? Talking to him about the ring, working, focusing, jointly attending. He didn't learn. And we were kind of a little bummed out about that. So we switched the label into model rival, and the second session, remember, it normally takes 20. Second session, he's going, ring, ring. So what we surmised is that he actually had learned about the label but didn't know what to do about it without our modeling the technique. It's modeling with our technique as to what to do with the label. And it turns out a colleague of mine has adapted our techniques for autistic children, and it turns out that's a very critical issue for the autistic children, to have given this model of what to do with the label. Another thing that came up was Okinawa in Japan had started looking at CRT screens and saying, wait a minute, parrots and birds, they have different flicker fusion rates than humans. Flicker fusion, okay, you look at the old CRT screen, you looked away a little bit and you saw that wriggling thing, jumping bit. It's, you know, it's scanning. It's not really there. It's just scanning. And the scan rate matches our vision, but it doesn't match the bird vision. The bird sees this kind of flickering image. So we switched to an LCD monitor. Okay. So now the birds paid more attention. They would try to grab the object off the monitor, things like that initially. Still no learning. So the bottom line here is that if you want referential learning in your parrot, and also, as I said, it helps for children with autism and other developmental delays, the training must have reference, must have functionality, interaction, including that reversal and the modeling. Okay, so there are more subtle effects of input on learning and something called mutual exclusivity. And I really am going to wrap up in a little bit. But this is a fun study because when you look at children, they go through, almost all of them go through a stage that they believe not only does every object have a label, but it has one label. Okay? And so literally at that stage, a child will look at their little stuffed, you know, animal and turtle, that's my turtle, you know, and then you say, but it's an animal. And they go, no animal, turtle. Okay? Now, obviously, kids don't get stuck in this stage or they wouldn't understand concepts of categories and move on ahead. But pretty much almost every child goes through this stage, and they go through it rapidly. Now, Alex hadn't gone through that stage. So the point, but thinking about it was, you know, we trained him that these things, you know, different shaped woods were woods, different keys were key. And then later on, we told him that, you know, this is a green wood, and this is green key. Remember, I was very careful to make him give us both of these. So that the green was an additional, not an alternative label. Okay? So it wasn't either or. And if you just, this is just a reworking of Alex's data to show what it would look like if we sort of separated out. These are generic errors and things like that. And you can see he's still right most of the time. So what if with Griffin now, we trained him a little bit more like the way children see things. So, you know, trucks, anything with 4 wheels in the lab is a truck. That's just the way we do it. So he learns that these things are truck and these things are keys, and he's really good. I mean, we don't get that many generic errors with him. He's really laser focused, about 95% accuracy with Griffin. And then we all of a sudden tell him, you got to call us, these things are yellow. This is blue. So it's an alternative label. And this is my favorite slide. 50 sessions before he starts to get some corrections here. It's really hard. And even to this day, you show him an object and you say, you know, what's here? Wool. You know, right on target. What color? Wool. No, Griffin, what color wool? Yellow. You know, it's like, I mean, and it's the opposite way around. He learned his labels. He knows the color labels, so you look, you give him little plastic cups, and he'll tell you their color labels, but you're trying to train him to say cup. It's yellow. I mean, you know, that's its label. So it's really hard to break that. So again, this might be very important. We don't know, but this might be very important for children, again, with disabilities, in how you approach teaching them things like adjectives and teaching them other concepts. So this is my last slide. And these are gray parrots in Africa and in Cameroon. And I show this because one of the questions that always comes up, and I figure I might as well answer it in my talk. People say, okay, you've got this parrot. He's been trained within an inch of his life. You know, people are with him all the time. What do they need these behaviors for in the wild? You know, why is this bird so smart? What do they use this stuff for? Well, the answer is, I mean, to be honest, we really don't know. But we think that the answers are the same ones that people like Alison Jolly and Nick Humphrey gave when they were asked, why are primates so smart? The answer is that these are long-lived creatures in a complex social and ecological environment, and they need the smarts to survive. They forage on many of the same things, not all, but many of the same things as chimpanzees. We don't think that they do the cooperative hunting, which could be a big issue. But they forage 60 kilometers a day. They are, you know, long-lived in the lab, 50 years, you know, 20 at least in the wild. So they got to remember, you know, large spatial map that, I mean, over the course of their lifetime, things are not going to stay the same. We're not even talking over the course of the year. We're talking over the course, they got to keep track of everything. Complex social environment, we really don't know. You can see from this thing, banding their feet didn't exactly help us to identify those of you who are, you know, ornithologists, if there are any in the thing. You could see banding their feet did not help us one bit with trying to identify these birds. Because of this environment with all these palm fronds and things like that, we were really afraid of wing tags, just on the possibility of something getting caught. The same reason we were very much afraid of doing paint splats on them, because we were afraid anything that could make them more visible to predators, and these are, although they're quite, in the Cameroon where we were studying them, they were quite, common, but they are an endangered species. So we don't know about their sociality, but in the laboratory, there is a dominance hierarchy. There's Alex up at top, and Griffin, even though he outweighs Alex by 50 grams, he cannot depose Alex as being top bird. And poor little Lillet's bird, Arthur, in the lab, also known as Wart, he's down at the so far down at the bottom of the totem pole, he doesn't even try. And so in the wild, chimpanzees, they've got transitive inference and stuff like that. If Sam beat up on Joe and Joe beat up on me, I don't even want to go near Sam. I'm going to get pulped. They don't have to find that out. It's too dangerous. They have to infer that kind of hierarchy. And it's possible that there's something like this in the birds. So I'm going to go for a little bit of video. I could go on for, maybe another hour on the stuff we've done, but this is one of those things where some of Alex's pictures of Alex are worth about, a lot more than my chatting. So I'm going to go to this and hope it will play as we planned. It worked before, and I know I can get it to work eventually. Oh, there it goes.
Many people believed that creating concepts and communicating ideas through language were the exclusive domain of humans. But scientists are re-evaluating that old dividing line between people and animals. First chimps and gorillas, and then dolphins have demonstrated language skills. So who's next to join this brainy bunch? Would you believe a bird?
What is it?
Meet Alex, an African gray parrot. This is not your average bird. Ask Alex a question, and you're likely to get an answer.
Alex, what's this? You silly bird. Yeah, it's a bean, green bean.
And most of the time, it's the right answer.
That's right.
Alex isn't just mimicking or making sounds he doesn't understand.
Good boy.
According to psychologist Irene Pepperberg at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Alex is actually thinking.
Tell me what's different. Color. Yeah, color. Okay. What color bigger? Green, you're right. Good boy.
He's got a vocabulary of more than 50 words. He understands concepts of size,
Shape, color.
and he's learning to count.
How many blue block?
4.
4 is right. Good boy. You're
He
right.
even knows how to ask for what he wants.
Some water.
What do you want?
You tickle.
Okay. Yeah.
Shower.
Yeah, yeah. Does that feel good?
What's going on in the brains of birds? For the past 17 years, that's been the subject of Dr. Pepperberg's research. Since 1978, she's been training Alex and putting him through a rigorous battery of psychological tests. On some tasks, Alex has performed as well as a 2-year-old child.
This is a task that we call a comprehension task. And what we have here is several different objects.
In this test, some objects are wood, some plastic, some made of wool. They're red, yellow, green, blue. 2 corners, 3, 4. Alex has to sort through all those combinations and answer which material is yellow and has 2 corners.
Yeah. Come on, 2-corner yellow what? 2-corner yellow what?
Wool.
Good boy, wool, that's right. Good parrot.
That took a lot of thought. He had to know concepts of color, shape, and material.
Wool.
What this communication tells us is that parrots are thinking creatures. They don't simply respond in a knee-jerk type of way.
They actually think about what they're saying. There's no way that Alex could answer the questions that we ask him if he wasn't thinking about what he was saying.
That's right, 4 quarters.
Another procedure tests to see if Alex can actually count.
If you give a tray like this to people, they have to actually count to tell you how many, say, blue blocks there are. And when we've done this trial with Alex, we found that he's actually working at about the same level as humans. How many green wolves? 2 is right. Good boy. Okay, you can have a nut.
It might seem that Alex is more into the nuts than the knowledge, but he has to ask for one first.
Now you'll notice that he gets a lot of nuts, and these are not artificial rewards. He never gets a nut unless he says, want a nut. Alex expresses a lot of needs. He tells us when he wants something to drink. He tells us when he wants something to eat. He tells us when he wants to go back to the main room in the lab area.
You want to go back?
Want to go back? Well, we can't go back for a bit, okay? You can't go back outside till we finish, all right? We don't know if he understands all the words in those phrases, but he uses them appropriately.
Alex has done so well as a student that now he's helping teach younger parrots, like Cairo, here on the left. In a technique called the model rival method, students work with the parrots in pairs. When Cairo sees Alex get rewarded, the innate rivalry seems to help him learn.
What toy?
You're
right.
Good boy.
No,
Look
what
out.
toy? What toy? No, you're right.
Good boy, Kyle.
The model rival technique has been so effective, it's now being used with developmentally delayed children with considerable success.
You know, the whole thing just blew me away when I came in here. There is a lot knocking around in their little itty-bitty heads.
After spending some time with Alex, it's unlikely anyone could use the phrase bird brain in quite the same way ever again.
Okay, Alex, you be good. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, you be good. Bye. I'll be here tomorrow. I love you.
So that's what I've spent the last 30 years of my life doing, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Irene, for a wonderful talk. Let's see if I can get somebody who gets Steve Planter. This side of the room, be thinking about your questions, question format. Somebody I know is going to say, well, parrots are fine, but what about owls?
Yeah. Yes, we dealt with aspergillosis just before I moved to Arizona, and that was before they had really good, antifungals. So it was really, my vet didn't tell me until after it was all over how touch and go it actually was. That's the only one. That's really, we then had a round of psittacosis when we moved to Tucson, because when we brought in the 2 new young birds, they had been tested with ELISA, but not with really detailed, the poop studies, things, and they were actually subclinical. And so we fought psittacosis for a while. It was going around the lab. And the only way we got rid of that was my vets was good friends with another friend of mine, a vet in the Netherlands, who we weren't supposed to use, I forget the name of the drug, but it was basically something that was not allowed to be used for veterinary purposes in the States, although it was the only thing that was really good against psittacosis. And his son was staying with my vet in Tucson as an exchange student that year. So he would send his son care packages of all sorts of Dutch chocolates, in the bottom of which was all of the antibiotics for Alex. Yeah. So he's been, thank God, knock on whatever wood there is, he's been healthy for the last several years.
I noticed that you, over here. Okay. I noticed that you and the students with you use a very supportive tone that reminds
Yes.
me of sort of
Mother East.
yeah.
Yes.
Is that is that necessary? I've heard that, read that it's important for like training dogs and that sort of thing. Is it necessary for
It's
parrots?
almost impossible to inhibit. I mean, that's an amazing thing. I have one student who I really have to yell at her because she talks even, more coochie, type of a thing. So we try to, greenie bean. She was a greenie beanie. Do you want greenie beanies? And I'm going like, no, it's green bean. You can say it in whatever tone you want, but it's green bean. But yeah, it's amazing around them. It is almost impossible to inhibit.
Have you done any, have you tried pieces?
Yeah. We did. It was real interesting. We gave him a test. We gave him the same test up, backwards and forwards on 2 separate days. And the forwards ones, good birdie, this kind of thing. And the other test, we just said, yep, And there was a slight difference in the accuracy, where when he, did the test the second time with our sort of being really non-committal and stuff, he seemed much, much less interactive, much less attentive to the questions and things like that. I mean, it's a one-shot thing, but we just decided, we're not going to go here, Catch people. And we got some people up front here.
Hi. Functional MRI is being used quite a bit in studying cognitive function in humans. Is that possible with birds, and would you have some kind of use for that?
I'd love to do it, but it's not, because functional MRI means you have to keep the subject's head really stable.
Yeah, right.
And trying to keep a parrot's head really stable without, literally putting it in some kind of a, contraption, which I'm not saying it's totally impossible, that you couldn't start to train the bird, right. But you've got to train the bird to, accept this thing and then to work with inside the system. So right now, we actually tried to do an fMRI in a budgie last summer. And the problem was that the magnet was not strong enough. And the brain is really, pea-sized in a budgie, and we really couldn't do anything. Even if we got regular MRIs at some point, I mean, it's something that we're hoping down the road. But you still, to get them inside it and you have to anesthetize them. And then it's, right. It's really dicey giving a parrot anesthesia. Birds, they lose birds a certain percentage of the time.
Does Alex have a sense, an idea of self?
Good question. We didn't do a standard mirror thing with him because a student at one point had him in front of a mirror and he was banging the mirror saying, "Look, what's that? What color?" And so, "That's you, Alex. You're gray." So that kind of messed that up. We did it with Griffin. We did it with Caio and Ala. We had them use mirrors, and they used mirrors appropriately to find hidden objects and things. Didn't seem to show a lot of self-recognition. We actually did the mark test with Griffin, who scratched his head for 9 seconds, and the mark didn't go away, and he didn't care anymore. And if you've ever watched a parrot eat a pomegranate, they really don't care if they've got red gunk all over their face. So, the answer is still up in the air with that. My suspicion is that they do, but I can't prove it.
Seems that they recognize other members of
their flock, yes. And it's, you tickle me and I tickle you, things like that. So I think it's there. But again, I can't yet prove it. You had some questions?
Are they motivated to perform better by food?
No. Basically they're motivated for a lot of it's a social interaction. That's really the major motivation. They like, having us get all excited about things and stuff like that. The food, Alex asks for what he wants. So sometimes it's a cork nut, sometimes it's a walnut, sometimes it's regular cashew nut, sometimes it's a tickle. Sometimes the motivation is you want to go back. And it's like, okay, if you do this trial, you can go back and we'll end the session, but you've got to do this trial. So it's, depends on the day, the month, the hour, whatever it is. They're not at all food deprived. They're treat deprived, okay, in a sense that we hope maybe rewarding them with these foods and things will do something, but, lots of times they'll ask for a nut, take a bite, throw it down. It's like, well, whatever. So food is not a high motivator.
I know the last 30 years you've learned about their cognitive and their communicational skills and their intelligence, but what about their emotions?
They're there, okay? They're obviously there. When I give him the tray and he throws everything on the ground, there's emotions. I can read certain things. I know if I continue doing X, I may get bitten. I don't study emotions and try to label them, Because even with humans, it's really hard. I mean, I give a talk like this, and there's always somebody in the audience who's, you know, going off to dreamland. And when I first started talking, it was, oh my God, I'm boring my audience or something. Then I'm thinking, wait a minute. How many times have I fallen asleep because I've come in from, you know, a overseas trip? I had a bad night the night before. I happened to be sitting under a hot light, you know, in the audience, and it's hot, and I'm dozing off. I mean, trying to understand what is, you know, what is a real emotion. I mean, it's really, really hard. But they're there, and you can start to read them, and you can start to understand them a little bit. But what is he angry? Is he bored? Is he tired? I mean, you know, I just know that not in a good mood is something I can state, okay? The look tells me I better not try any trials today because I'm not going to get any data. But, you know, to essentially say, what is the emotion that may be parallel to ours or analogous or homologous to ours? You know.
Yeah, I have a blue and gold macaw, and she has a full range of emotions that's you know, difficult to deal with and also very rewarding.
Yeah.
You got one up top and then two more down here, and then you got a break.
Okay.
Do any of the birds try to talk to each other or teach each other?
A little bit. They don't act, well, initially they did not actively try to teach. So we could use Alex as a model. Now he actually will look at Griffin and tell Griffin to talk clearly or say better. And he butts into Griffin's session, so whether he's trying to help or not is questionable, but he butts in. But he'll also sometimes, we can actually use him now sometimes to teach Griffin. So if we're working on something like color, we will actually can get him to ask Griffin, you know, what color or what shape or something like that. So I think it's getting a little more active. But I think he's doing it because he gets so much praise and attention for being, you know, for doing something like that.
Using the referential reinforcement method, have you ever found that he's completely lost interest in any object such that you can no longer use it? And have you ever tried using non-referential reinforcement to bring that object back into the training?
Well, no, because what I didn't get into is that if he doesn't want the object, he can throw it on the floor and ask for anything else. That's what I was trying to get at in the video. So if there's something that he really doesn't like anymore, and that won't motivate him, he knows he can throw it to the floor and then ask for whatever he wants.
So he can kind of, he can complete the trial, meaning he can tell you what he wants, but then he can ask you for something to get his own reward.
Right, right. And that's really, and it's still referential because he's being rewarded with what he wants.
Well, I know that people have done a lot of work with crows, for example. They've studied crows not for their language skills, but for their other kinds of skills. So what other birds, you were mentioning that jays and mynas and parrots and
crows, yeah.
Crows seem to be very smart. Are there any other birds that you could use this language training with
yeah.
besides these gray parrots?
Yeah. Well, myna birds obviously have this ability, but mynas don't live very long comparatively, which is something that you worry about with this type of task. We know that, you know, starlings will learn. Meredith West did a little bit of work with starlings, and they will learn English speech. But again, you've got a bird that's living, if you're lucky, you know, 8 or 9 years. And if you're going to, I mean, if you're going to invest this kind of time, you want something that's going to, you know, at least parallel your career. I mean, and seriously, you know, yeah.
We have a reception that's prepared just outside these doors. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Irene, for a wonderful talk.